Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Michael Shepard, I'm Tyler Kendall.
Tonight, Trump ratchets up the pressure on the Federal Reserve.
The strong words from the president today targeting another member of the Fed, this time Fed Governor Lisa Cook, what the president is alleging on the eve of the Jackson Hole Forum, and how Washington is reacting. Up ahead.
Plus, following another Russian drone barrage, NATO's defense chiefs meet on the next steps in trying to guarantee security for Ukraine. We'll discuss what a potential outcome might look like with former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta.
Also tonight, how California is looking to match Texas's redistricting efforts when California Attorney General Rob Bonta joins us.
And 1 month after the president signed a series of artificial intelligence executive orders, are we headed for a data center bonanza? We're in Northern Virginia's Data Center Alley for a look at how the issue is playing out on the ground. But we begin with the latest from the Trump administration. The president ramping up his attacks on the Federal Reserve, this time aiming his ire at Fed Governor Lisa Cook, calling for her resignation after Trump appointee FHFA Director Bill Pulte urged an investigation into Cook over a pair of mortgages. Trump taking to Truth Social to post that Cook, who was appointed by Joe Biden, quote, must resign now, end quote, citing Pulte's allegations.
It all comes as the Jackson Hole Economic Policy Symposium kicks off with Fed Chair Jerome Powell slated to speak 2 days from now. And we've got the news covered for you from across the country. Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan from the White House, Michael McKee in Jackson Hole, former Deputy Treasury Secretary Wally Adeyemo here with us in Washington. But we begin tonight with Kate Sullivan from the White House North Lawn. Kate, thanks for being here. Can you just break down for us what we actually know about these allegations that President Trump is now pushing when it comes to Fed Governor Lisa Cook?
Absolutely. So Trump is once again trying to exert power and control over the Fed. So today, as you mentioned, he called on Fed Governor Lisa Cook to resign. He actually, in the Truth Social posts where he called on her to resign, he actually shared a Bloomberg article written by my colleague Josh Wingrove that was talking about what Bill Pulte's allegations. So Pulte, the Federal Housing Finance Agency Director, is urging Pam Bondi to investigate Cook over a pair of mortgages that she took out. So Pulte's allegations are, Pulte's suggesting that there could be criminal activity here and is claiming that she falsified bank documents and property records to get a more favorable loan. So Trump, is pointing to these allegations as he's trying to pressure yet another top Fed official to resign.
All right, Bloomberg's Kate Sullivan, we thank you as always for your reporting. And now for a closer look into what President Trump's recent Fed calls mean for the central bank, we turn to Bloomberg's Michael McKee. He joins us live in Jackson Hole ahead of tomorrow's Economic Policy Symposium kicking off. Mike, let's just start with the pressure campaign that we have seen from this White House. We know that there is a very high legal bar here if there is any consideration to remove a Fed governor. Tell us how this is likely to play out.
Well, the Federal Reserve Act says that Fed governors are appointed for 14-year terms unless removed by the president for cause. And it's that for cause clause that is at issue here. The Supreme Court said in a decision earlier this year that the way the Fed is set up, the president can't just fire somebody. They do have to have a reason. Now, Bill Pulte is alleging that there is a reason, that it is fraud on her mortgage applications, and that would be cause. Now, whether Lisa Cook is on the board or not isn't really going to help the president in his desire to get lower interest rates, because she votes with the majority all the time and she votes with the chair. And at this point, she is considered someone who is not going to break ranks, and if the majority votes for a rate cut, she would go along. What may be happening here is that the president is looking to get her off the board so he can appoint a fourth member to the Fed governor's board, and then he would have some sort of control if he could get all four of the members he's appointed in the Fed and try to push interest rates lower and maybe do some other policy changes at the central bank.
Bloomberg's Michael McKee, thank you. Now for a look at the economic impact of President Trump's call for Fed Governor Lisa Cook to resign is Wally Adeyemo. He is a former U.S. Deputy Treasury Secretary in the Biden administration who joins us live here in our Washington bureau. Wally, thank you for being with us tonight. I want to start with you from your perspective. As a former Treasury official, what does this pressure campaign look like when it comes to the U.S. position of global trust across the world economy?
I think it's important for us not to look at this as an attack on one individual Fed governor, but an attack on an institution. And the independence of the Federal Reserve has been at its core central to the confidence that investors around the world have in the U.S. economy. You know, in my old job, one of the things I did was meet with investors in the United States, but people around the world who wanted to deploy capital here in the United States. And one of the reasons they felt confident doing that was because of the rule of law and because of the strength of our institutions. One of the strongest institutions has been the Federal Reserve, and maintaining that independence is key to our economic growth. So the calls for various Fed governors to resign, who are both Democrats and Republicans, but frankly, all of whom have focused on the data rather than politics, undermines one of the key strengths of the economy.
Well, a quick follow on this notion of trust. What does this mean, for instance, in the world's trust in the dollar, the global reserve currency?
The reality is that one of the things the Fed is charged with is making monetary policy decisions. Ultimately, those decisions that they make, those calls that they make, being independent of political interference is one of the reasons that countries around the world are willing to lend money to the United States, knowing that the Fed is going to make a decision based on its dual mandate, not based on politics, regardless of if the president is a Democrat or a Republican. Having that confidence in the Fed is important to not Democrats and Republicans, but to Americans in terms of our ability to make sure that we have an economy that continues to grow.
Well, of course, at the moment, the Fed's monetary policy and this wait-and-see mode that we've seen from the central bank does have to do with the president's tariff plans. And you had a really interesting piece in Foreign Affairs, and I wanted to pull a quote from it, where you write that, quote, Trump deserves some credit for forcing the world to grapple with the failures of the existing global trade order. Decades of deindustrialization have harmed large swaths of the American workforce and undermined U.S. national security by creating supply chain dependencies on potential adversaries. So when we are looking holistically at the White House's tariff plans, these trade policies, what in your view is working versus what isn't so much?
What the president has done is focused attention on the issue, but ultimately what we need is a trade strategy that lowers costs for the American people, creates more manufacturing jobs for our workers and our companies, but allows Americans to be able to export things to the rest of the world. What is working is that the president has drawn attention to the issue. The challenge, of course, is that the tariff strategy that he's put in place is increasing costs on Americans. The best example of this is you look at the F-150 truck, which is made here in the United States. The F-150, when you look at the tariff taxes on that vehicle, is going to cost more than, for example, a Toyota. An F-150 made here in the United States is going to cost more for tariffs than a Toyota vehicle made in Japan, shipped to the United States. That can't be an outcome that anyone wants.
And part of the administration's push has been this idea of national security. We've seen the Section 232 tariffs enacted on it, and you talk about this emphasis on national security carve-outs. Talk to us about the balance here that the administration would need to thread when you hear perhaps the current Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent talk about the difference between decoupling versus de-risking when we are looking at those countries where we have those national security concerns like China.
I think one of the most important things about the national security issues that we deal with is that they be done in a bipartisan way. That's what we did with the CHIPS and Science Act, which is allowing America to build chips in a cutting-edge way. But we have to separate out what is national security versus what is economics. I've seen some say that building textiles and building shoes here in the United States is a key to national security. That can't be true. We need to focus on true national security concerns, be they chips or be they things like critical minerals that are key to our defense industrial base, because doing so will allow us to invest in these things, protect the United States, but also allow American companies and firms to compete with the rest of the world. We're in the middle of earnings season, and when you hear these CEOs talk, they're making very clear that tariffs are costing them money and that they're planning to pass on those costs to their consumers. That isn't in anyone's interest. We need a strategy that allows American companies to grow, workers to earn money, and for us to sell American goods around the world.
Wally, you brought up the Chips and Science Act. We're seeing, and Bloomberg has broken the news, that the administration is weighing whether to use some of that Chips Act money to take an equity stake in Intel and perhaps even other companies. Now, is this a good use or even proper use of that money? And is this an effective strategy to have the government taking essentially an ownership stake in companies like that?
My view is that I believe in the private sector and its ability to innovate, and government should largely stay out of running private companies unless it's absolutely necessary. Based on what we've seen in terms of private investments in Intel, I think the key is to make sure that what government does, especially with the Chips and Science money, is that we create incentives for these companies that allow them to create good-paying jobs here in the United States and unlock the ability of the private sector to deliver for the American people. When the Chips and Science Act was passed, as I mentioned, it was done on a bipartisan basis because we knew that in addition to national security concerns, we wanted to make sure we had the ability to create good-paying jobs here in the United States. The goal was not for the United States government to be the driver of chip creation. We wanted to make sure that American companies not only built chips for America, but to my point, that the chips that were built here, we could ship to the rest of the world so American jobs could be created shipping things across the world.
So just moving forward here, when you do see the administration take perhaps a more hands-on industrial policy, we saw this with the Nippon deal, for example, and the so-called golden share. How do you see this evolving if this already appears to be the path that at least this administration's already on?
And I think that the reality was that in the Biden administration, there was a great deal done when it came to industrial policy as well. The question really is around, are you creating incentives and then allowing the private sector to take it from there? Or is the government taking ownership stake and actually controlling companies in the economy? My view is that we should let the private sector do what it does well, which is innovate, create jobs, and move forward. But in some cases, it's important for the United States government to create incentives. That's what we've done on Chips and Science. That's what we need to do in select industries that are key to our national security and to building out our economy. The challenge, of course, is that tariffs, instead of creating those opportunities to create jobs, what we're seeing today is those tariffs are increasing the cost for consumers and making it harder for our companies to operate.
How soon are we going to start seeing some of those costs really play their way through the economy from businesses and then to consumers?
And I think people have been surprised that you haven't seen more of that already. But when you listen to these earnings calls, these CEOs are making clear that they're starting to see those costs increase and they're going to pass them on to consumers. I think the challenge today is that as you look at the labor market and you're starting to see apparel cost, and as parents get ready to go shopping for back to school, they're going to see potentially higher cost for clothing. And these companies are seeing higher cost for inputs. And what that naturally means is that American companies are going to be less competitive vis-a-vis companies in China or companies in the rest of the world, which isn't anyone's goal. That's why we think that it's important for us to work together with our allies and partners to lower tariffs and then to jointly confront China in a way that allows us to create jobs, to lower costs, and also to create opportunities for American companies to sell things, not just here in the United States, but around the world.
Fascinating conversation. Wally Adeyemo, former US Deputy Treasury Secretary under the Biden administration. Thank you so much for joining us here on Bloomberg. And now, as President Trump calls for Fed Governor Lisa Cook to resign, central bank leaders are gathering in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, to await Jerome Powell's speech, his final speech as Fed chair at the Economic Policy Symposium on Friday. Here are some analysts this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance previewing the remarks we could expect later this week.
There is lingering concerns about what's going to happen on Friday with Powell. If there's a downside risk to Jay Powell's comments, it's going to be something that might ding home builders.
Very much unlike last year when Powell made it clear that a cut was coming in September 2024. He's going to keep his options open.
I think what we're likely to see is hearing from all of the other central bankers pushing back and really defending the Fed about the importance of independence.
Now, for more insight into this week's symposium, we turn now to Danielle DiMartino Booth, CEO and Chief Strategist at QI Research, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. Danielle, thanks so much for being here. Of course, as we head into Friday's speech with Jerome Powell, perhaps overshadowing is these new allegations from President Trump when it comes to Fed Governor Lisa Cook. Just your initial reaction on how investors should be weighing this rhetoric from the administration as we got the minutes today and then Powell's speech on Friday.
Well, I think we're in an interesting time here because the administration probably has a greater appreciation for the history of Mariner Eccles, who in 1948, when Truman booted him out as the chair of the Fed, decided to finish out his 14-year term as a Fed governor. And we know that Jay Powell can stay through the end of January 2028. And as such, it's clear that the administration feels like it needs to make room to put somebody else on the committee that's going to speak in its voice. And I think that is a lot of what's driving this. The Bloomberg Terminal had a great story today covering the Philadelphia Fed and some research that it conducted and released in 2023 that shows that this type of mortgage fraud, which is being allocated, that this is in 2 to 3% of the mortgages that have existed after the housing bust of the late 2000s. So it's not crystal clear that the administration will prevail, but it's clear that Trump really wants to change the complexion of the leadership at the Fed one way or another.
Danielle, what do you expect from Chair Jay Powell during his remarks on Friday when it comes to defending Fed independence? This, in a way, will be his valedictory remarks at Jackson Hole as Fed chair. This would be an opportunity, perhaps, for him to lay down more of a marker.
It certainly would. And, indemnifying his legacy is clearly going to be front and center for him. He will lean on the importance of Fed independence. And as your prior guest said, that's going to be extremely important for everybody in the audience as well. He will have a very welcoming audience that also wants to safeguard the independence of the Fed. A lot, I think, also remains on tomorrow morning's data, though. We're going to get the survey week data out for August payrolls in the initial jobless claims data that's released tomorrow. We hope that is as benign as it's been recently. But Powell, given the theme of Jackson Hole centers on the labor market, Powell certainly doesn't need any more ammunition against him in the hard data.
Well, building off of when we're talking about the labor market, we did, of course, get the FOMC minutes today, the majority seeing inflation risks outweighing employment risks. But they also said, perhaps not surprisingly, that several committee members expected companies will pass on those tariffs to consumers. And I'm wondering which sectors you're watching. But also, I wanted to point out another data point. How does perhaps lower income growth limit the extent to which firms can pass on those costs to consumers?
So I think you bring up a very valid point. It's not that American companies don't want to pass along higher input costs. We're seeing the margin squeeze play out in real time. But to your point, is there purchasing power? The Atlanta Fed wage growth tracker is showing a sustained decline in wage gains all the way back to where we were prior to the pandemic hitting. And you've got multiple record numbers of Americans working multiple jobs, plenty of people working part-time when they would rather have full-time positions. There were 440,000 full-time positions lost in the month of July alone. That purchasing power is absolutely key. And I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing food inflation reignite in areas where you absolutely have no choice but to pass along those higher input costs. Well, it remains to be seen, to me at least, when we're going to see this tariff pass through in more discretionary consumption areas.
Danielle DiMartino Booth, CEO and Chief Strategist at QI Research, thank you. Turning overseas now, where Ukraine was hit overnight by a barrage of Russian drones, igniting a fire at an energy facility in the Odessa region that had emergency workers racing to the scene. A drone from that attack crashing into Poland. Poland, an EU and NATO member, claiming the crash was a provocation from Russia. That coming the same day that NATO military chiefs met remotely as we await more details for a potential trilateral meeting between Presidents Trump, Putin, and Zelensky. For more, we want to bring in Leon Panetta, former U.S. Secretary of Defense and former director of the CIA. Thank you for joining us, Director Panetta. We want to start tonight with this whole question of security guarantees, which has been the main and driving topic of Ukraine this week since the meeting on Monday at the White House between President Trump and European leaders. To your view, what do security guarantees need to look like to essentially prevent a repeat of what happened in 1994 with the Budapest Memorandum that really left Ukraine over the long run short of an adequate defense against a potential Russian invasion?
Well, the primary point that needs to be made with these security assurances is that the United States and our European allies, particularly those that are part of NATO, will in fact make clear that they will come to the assistance of Ukraine if Russia should attack in the future. And so Europe has indicated that they're prepared to move in that direction. I think the president indicated that he was prepared to support security clearances. Even though he pulled back on boots on the ground, he did say that they would look seriously at providing air support to help in those security assurances. The one problem right now is that Russia is saying that somehow it needs a veto power over what those assurances look like. And since the primary purpose of those security assurances is to be able to protect Ukraine from a Russian invasion, I'm not so sure that's something that's going to happen.
Well, and Mr. Secretary, we did have Bloomberg News reporting today, actually, that European leaders are discussing a guarantee for Ukraine that would commit allies to decide within 24 hours whether to provide military support to the country if it was attacked again by Russia, much to your point. But just to drill down a little further on this, I'm wondering what is realistic? What should we expect from the U.S. when it comes to their side of contributing to these guarantees? For example, we hear a lot about air cover, and that seems to be an emerging theme in these discussions.
Well, I think to be fair, security assurances are not going to work unless the United States is part of that agreement. We bring a lot to the table, obviously from a military point of view and from the ability to try to support any military effort that might have to occur on the ground. So it's very important that the United States be part of those security assurances. It's very important that Europe agree that that they will come together and support Ukraine in that event. I think 24 hours is, probably makes some sense, but it really has to look like implementation of a Title V kind of approach, that once Russia decides to invade Ukraine again, that all of the nations of NATO will again respond as they have now.
Director Panetta, last night on Balance of Power, we spoke with William Taylor, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Here's what he had to say about the prospect of Vladimir Putin really participating in a bilateral or even trilateral meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky.
Putin doesn't want to end this war. Putin wants to drag it out. He wants to keep pounding the Ukrainians until they give up. They're never going to give up, but he's going to keep pounding until he's forced to come to the table for a ceasefire. So, no, I don't think he's eager. I don't think he has any intentions of coming to a bilateral meeting. He may say something on the phone to President Trump to tell President Trump that he's willing to do it. But they're not serious about these negotiations. And Putin is not either. Putin wants all of Ukraine, and he wants to pound them until he gets that.
Director Panetta, we have yet to hear from Moscow about whether they will or will not agree to a meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. How much time should Donald Trump give the Russian leader to agree to a sit-down? And what happens next if Putin balks or refuses?
Well, again, there is a fundamental principle here that Bill Taylor referred to, which is that you can't trust Vladimir Putin in these issues. You just can't. I think it's 88% of the American people in a recent poll said do not trust Vladimir Putin. That's pretty good judgment on the part of the American people. That's the reality, is that it's very difficult to really try to find a way to get Putin to negotiate seriously. Right now, I think he's largely playing for time. He's continuing the war. He's refused to agree to any kind of ceasefire. He even talked about the need to eliminate the root causes of the war. Well, the root cause of the war was that Russia invaded Ukraine on the basis that it is a part of Russia and not a sovereign democracy on its own. So he basically is saying he wants to win. I think it's very important for President Trump to make very clear to Putin that he wants him to participate in this trilateral or meeting with Zelensky. And if it doesn't happen, I think the president really does have to, he's got to come back and hold tough with Putin by implementing sanctions, by providing weapons, and by making very clear to Vladimir Putin that he cannot win this war. That is going to be very important to our ability to negotiate.
Leon Panetta, former U.S. Secretary of Defense and former director of the CIA, we thank you so much for joining us on Bloomberg. And coming up, while California Democrats have advanced their redistricting plan, the Republican colleagues are gearing up for a fight to that proposal. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Michael Shepard. I'm Tyler Kendall. The artificial intelligence race has been the driver behind tech stocks' recent surge to record highs, and demand for the data centers to support AI is so strong that Bloomberg is reporting that Morgan Stanley turned to private credit investors for $29 billion in financing for Meta's massive servers.
But it's not just money that data centers are consuming with a ferocious appetite, Tyler. These giant buildings are also gulping up resources like power and land, too, making for a tense situation in communities nationwide. For more, we're taking you to Northern Virginia, a data center hotbed that Bloomberg reporter Josh Saul visited earlier this year as part of a Bloomberg Originals report. Here is a part of that piece.
So over here is called our cold aisle containment system. This is where all the cabinets are landed and lined up.
Why do you need a cold aisle? Why's it got to be cold?
We have to make sure that they stay cold while the servers are all on inside of each rack. We have to make sure all the output that they're doing is staying as cold as possible so they run efficiently.
How much electricity would this whole room consume?
Once this room is at full capacity, it can go up to 4 megawatts of power.
Okay, 4 megawatts. Help me out with that. Well, like how many homes could that power?
Yep, so if we break it down, 1 megawatt could power about 3,000 to 4,000 homes. So this could power up to 12,000 homes.
Wow. So what are we going to see out here?
So right now we're on the roof of this data center. You can see it's filled with what we need to cool down all of those crack units or computer room air conditioners we saw inside the data hall.
Okay.
So these are called ACUs, or air conditioned compressor.
They're kind of noisy.
Yes, they're very noisy. That's why we kind of have the walls.
Okay.
It kind of boxes in the sound.
Okay.
Because we keep the residents in mind. So we try and make sure the sound is as buffered in as possible. They would be louder during the summertime.
I was going to say, it's kind of cold. We should have brought our jackets. Why are they even running right now?
So they're running on what's called a free cooling mode, which means it's using the outside air instead of...
Just big fans. They're big fans.
Big fans.
Why is it so important that you have power continually? If you didn't have power and the data center just shut down for a couple of days, why is that a big deal?
So in data centers, we have healthcare, we have transportation, we have government. Imagine a government shutdown, how chaotic that is. Something like that happens in a data center, nobody can send an email, nobody can work. Everyone loves to have the day off, but it has such a huge impact on the neighborhood, the city, the world.
I was elected in November 2023. I wanted to run because I disagreed with the direction the county was going in, particularly with land use and with the placement of data centers. The good thing, data centers do generate revenue. And last year, when we raised the CMP tax rate, we generated more money, for the county and for our schools. But everything in moderation. For us on the Board of County Supervisors, I'm saying we have to be the traffic cop. We cannot approve a data center any and everywhere. These are industrial warehouses. They shouldn't be next to homes, schools, national parks. They should be in areas that have enough power to run these facilities. The land we give to data centers is land that other businesses aren't able to purchase. It's also land that, we're not able to use for housing or retail or any other developments. Virginia is a beautiful commonwealth. It's very scenic. We have so much history here. I'm afraid that that's going to be lost if we're just giving in to data centers' demands.
when you talk with legislators today, be clear that we're not against data centers. We want them to be better.
Our morning started really early in a really cold, really dark parking lot where we met a group of data center opponents, and we all got on a bus to travel here to Richmond, where they are lobbying their lawmakers for what they would call responsible data center development.
In transportation, there are speed limits, there are safety standards, there are noise limits, and we're here to lobby about an industry in Virginia that is overwhelming us, and there are no laws and standards.
We traveled with one woman, Elena Schlossberg, who's sort of at the center of this fight, and she's been going toe-to-toe with the biggest data center developers for about the past decade.
That's really something I want to message to the legislators, is the history books are being written right now. And the question is, what do you want the history books to say about you?
The first year we went, nobody knew about data centers. What's a data center? The next year we went, suddenly people are starting to go, oh, there's maybe something about data centers. Oh, so the Legislative Review Commission report finally came out, and my favorite word was unconstrained. Unconstrained data center development is what is risking our reliable energy, our clean air and clean water, the health and well-being of the state of Virginia.
You can head to Bloomberg Originals' YouTube page to watch the rest of that report.
And we do want to bring you some breaking news coming in just moments ago. Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook issuing a statement following President Trump's allegations of mortgage fraud and calling for her resignation. Cook saying in a statement, quote, "I have no intention of being bullied to step down. I do intend to take any questions about my financial history seriously as a member of the Federal Reserve, and so I am gathering the accurate information to answer any legitimate questions and provide the facts." We will be following this story all day here on Bloomberg, and we'll come up with more news when Michael McKee joins us from Jackson Hole.
For now, we're going back to our reporting on data centers. And joining us now for more is the reporter featured in that piece, Bloomberg's Josh Saul, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. Josh, it's been almost a month since the president announced his AI action plan and executive orders loosening restrictions on data centers. What have we seen change, and what is the vibe out there in the places where these data centers are going to be built?
Data center developers were already chomping at the bit to build huge numbers of these new facilities, and utilities are extremely excited for these new customers. I would say that Trump's action plan and these executive orders are a tailwind that's kind of heating up an already super hot part of the economy.
And Josh, can you give us just a little bit more insight here into what President Trump's AI action plan actually does in principle? What did the administration outline last month when they unveiled this?
Trump's main idea is that the U.S. needs to be the global leader in artificial intelligence. The grid is no longer sort of a boring concern of utilities. It's a top national priority. So his action plan and the executive orders, they aim to loosen restrictions on AI and data center development, and they aim to kind of supercharge energy dominance and the energy supply so that there's enough electricity moving around to power all of these data centers, because that's crucial. Without electricity, data centers really can't do anything.
All right. Fascinating stuff. Bloomberg's Josh Saul, thank you so much for your reporting. And for more, we turn now to Raul Martynek, CEO of Databank, the holder of over 60 data centers nationwide. He joins us now from World Headquarters in New York. Mr. Martynek, thanks so much for joining. And I want to pick up on something that Josh was just talking about when it comes to just how much energy consumption these data centers use. In your view, can the U.S. energy grid, as it stands right now, support all of this demand that we're seeing from data centers?
Hi, great to be here. So, yeah, as Josh just said, there's been just a tremendous amount of demand for data centers across the country. You do see some markets that have been struggling to meet that demand, but ultimately what you're seeing happen is, just like any economic system, is developers are going to places where there is power, where there is land, where there is an ability to build them. So you're starting to see data center developments happening in places like North Dakota and in western Texas and in Wyoming, which are places that traditionally data centers didn't develop. So it's going to be a tight supply and demand balance, but on balance, the sector is going to continue to evolve, and people are going to find a way to bring these data centers to market.
I do want to drill down a little bit more on this idea of energy consumptions with data centers, because I was actually at the Pennsylvania Energy and Innovation Summit last month. As you likely know, was where the Trump administration unveiled a lot of its plans to keep the U.S. competitive when it comes to artificial intelligence. But as the name suggests, energy was really the main component here. And there was this conversation about how AI energy demand is impacting consumers. And I actually had the chance to ask the CoreWeave CEO his thoughts on this and whether or not this is proving to be a burden to consumers. And here's what he said.
I think that policy makers raising that issue to ensure that the data centers, the consumers of compute are paying their fair share is a completely reasonable approach to take to this. It is necessary, but it's also necessary to understand that this is a absolutely critical infrastructure build that's going on and will continue to go on for many, many years.
I'd love to get your view on this. Sure. Is that the realistic interpretation here? How much concern do you have that the consumption from these AI data centers could pose a burden on consumers when it comes to energy prices?
Yeah, well, look, this is a complicated topic. There's a lot to unpack here, right? The reality is, as people know, over the last 2 decades, electric demand in the U.S. has been totally flat. And what that's resulted in is underinvestment in the electric grid. And then over the last 5 years, you've had a number of trends. Obviously, the trend towards renewable energy, kind of the CHIPS Act driving a lot of semiconductor manufacturing here in the U.S. Obviously, Trump's policies are looking to bring back manufacturing to the U.S. And now you have AI data centers and regular data centers also driving demand. So it's this classic case of demand and supply coming out of balance at this point. But ultimately, all these users of electricity, I mean, when we connect to the grid, we're buying off a utility tariff, right? That tariff, by definition, is made so that the utility can recover their cost and earn a return on that. So no one's getting a free ride here. We are paying for the power that we're consuming, and the utilities, rightly so, are making sure that they don't build too much that then doesn't get used in the future. But ultimately, I think this is all going to solve itself just through normal market factors, and you're already seeing it happen.
Raul, we're seeing this enthusiasm by the administration and the tech industry to build, baby, build on AI and on data centers. And yet the report we just saw suggests that there might be a little bit of fear and loathing out there in the communities where some of these data centers ultimately may be located. What is the responsibility that the industry and companies like you have to be good neighbors and address issues like noise and other questions?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think every responsible data center developer out there, and let's not forget the largest data center developers in the U.S. are kind of the hyperscalers, right? The Amazons, the Microsofts, the Googles. I would argue that as an industry, we've been good neighbors. We try to develop, very efficient data centers, because obviously efficiency is a way we can drive down costs. And remember that data center development only occurs with local zoning, right? So we can't just build a data center anywhere. We have to go to places that the local community has dictated that from a zoning perspective, you can build a data center. So you do have some markets where historically data centers have developed kind of with less zoning controls, like in the Northern Virginia area that the video pointed out. But for the most part, we're developing in industrial areas. We're developing kind of outside of urban areas. And again, the town is telling us, hey, we can site a data center. And I'll give you a perfect example. About 50 miles south of Ashburn, there's a community community called Culpeper. And what Culpeper decided to do is, hey, we do want data centers here, but we want to control how they get developed. So they created a couple thousand-acre Culpeper technology zone. And in that area, data center developers can build data centers because it's a place where electricity can be brought in a cost-effective manner, and you can still preserve all the other uses for different types of development outside of that economic zone. So I look at examples like that as the future of how the community and the data center sector can, collaborate together to bring this commodity, to market. Let's not forget that what happens in a data center is really our entire digital life, right? Everyone wants to work remotely. Everyone wants to send their emails, wants to access to their medical health records. Every digital interaction originates and terminates in a data center. So the data centers are supporting our economy. They're supporting our way of life. We need to find a way to harmoniously, make it work and live together.
Raul Martynek, CEO of Databank, thank you. Now we want to turn back to that breaking news from Fed Governor Lisa Cook. Cook pulling out a statement just moments ago saying that she is not stepping down despite the president's call for her resignation. Bloomberg's Mike McKee is back with us from Jackson Hole in Wyoming. Mike, what are we seeing in this statement? She is standing her ground. And are we getting any sense that the Fed is closing ranks around her? And are we expecting to see her at the symposium in Jackson Hole later this week?
Well, she was expected here. We don't know what her plans are or if they have changed since this morning, but she did put out a statement just a short time ago saying that she would not be bullied into resigning, stepping down from my position because of some questions raised in a tweet. She says she intends to take questions about my financial history seriously as a member of the Federal Reserve, so I am gathering the accurate information to answer any legitimate questions and provide the facts. So obviously more to come on this from Lisa Cook and from the Fed. As far as whether the Fed is closing ranks around her, we would assume that to a certain extent they would. But Fed officials aren't going to have the answers either. So I would expect that most of her colleagues on the Fed will say, we can't comment at this time.
Yeah. Well, Mike, can you give us just a little bit more context here into whether or not this really is clouding this meeting that's happening thrown by the Kansas City Fed? Because there's a lot of different things on the horizon here ahead of Jerome Powell's speech on Friday, not to mention the potential for a September rate cut.
Yeah, there are three things sort of on the unofficial and official agendas here that are all going to be overlapping and take up a lot of time here. One, of course, is Jay Powell's speech on Friday and whether he gives the markets any hints of a September rate cut. The other is what's happening with Lisa Cook. I've seen several senior Fed officials who have arrived here in the last couple of hours, and all we talked about was the Lisa Cook issue at this moment. And then what is it that the president is trying to do to the Fed? Is he trying to take over? Is he trying to get Lisa Cook out so he can appoint somebody else? That's going to be an issue for people's discussion, as well as what's the Fed going to do in September, and will the president's efforts have any kind of effect on what the Fed is thinking when they get to that meeting?
Mike, you've been to a number of these meetings there in Jackson Hole over the years, and we're also expecting central bankers from around the world. Are they preparing to mount a global defense of sorts of the Fed against this pressure against its independence by Donald Trump?
I think of sorts is the right way to put it, Mike. The foreign central bankers who were at the Sintra meeting, the ECB's annual meeting in Portugal in June, did give fairly robust defenses of central bank independence, saying that central banks that were free to make their own monetary policy as best they saw fit would have better results for their economies. And we expect some of them to say similar things here, but they probably won't put it in the context of Jay Powell or Lisa Cook, just central banks in general.
Bloomberg's Michael McKee from Jackson Hole, thank you. Turning now to Texas, this is the scene playing out right now on the floor of the House chamber, with state Republicans there on the verge of passing a key hurdle in adopting new congressional maps in the state that could give the GOP up to 5 seats more away from Democrats. The floor debate today happening as state Democrats remain under supervision of police to stay in the state as the legislature proceeds with their special session, a move that lawmakers protested against last night. Now, Democrats in blue states are vowing payback for the Texas map, with California lawmakers now poised to approve their own retaliatory gerrymandered map for voters to consider in November. Joining us now for more here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio is Rob Bonta, Attorney General of California. And Attorney General Bonta, we have to ask, Republicans in California are preparing to mount a legal challenge of their own against whatever Gavin Newsom and Democrats in the state may try to do when it comes to gerrymandering there and redistricting there. How are you preparing to fend off that challenge and ensure that whatever new maps are proposed and perhaps passed by the legislature actually hold up?
Well, I think it's really important. Thanks for having me, first of all. And I think it's really important to remember that Trump started this. He called Governor Abbott and asked for 5 more seats, just like in 2020, following the election that he lost. He called the Secretary of State of Georgia, asking for 11,000 more votes. And Governor Abbott started this. Texas started this. Republicans started this. And California, through Governor Newsom and the legislature and their actions, are trying to end this, trying to block this, trying to stop this abuse of power and this rigging of the system, to try to defend against what is inevitable, that Democrats will win the midterm elections and retake the House. And the plan that Governor Newsom has articulated and the legislature seems to be supportive of, we'll see how they vote this week, is to present maps to the people, let them vote, the ultimate form of direct democracy. And the new maps would only take effect if triggered by Texas or another red state improperly, abusively trying to rig the system and add more seats. And we would go back to an independent redistricting commission in 2030 after the next census count, according to everything the governor has said and the legislature seems to be supporting. So it's a principled, lawful response to an abuse of power by Texas and by Trump and by Republicans and by Abbott and by red states. And my role would be, if there's a lawsuit, and there's already been at least one lawsuit filed earlier this week, we will defend the state of California to the extent an agency or department asks for our representation, and our job is to defend the laws of the state of California in court, which we will do dutifully and professionally and ethically.
So, Mr. Attorney General, it sounds like you feel confident that there is a legal argument here when it comes to California. But I'm wondering if you have any level of concern about this potentially backfiring, considering voter sentiment in California around incumbents. How are you factoring that into these calls when it comes to potentially remaking the congressional map?
I think there is a strong desire to stop the abusive conduct of Trump, of Republicans. It is clearly, transparently, an attempt to rig the system. If their policies were so popular, and clearly polling shows they're not, they wouldn't have to find more districts. They could just run on their record, run on their policies. They can't. So they're trying to choose their voters instead of having the voters choose them and choose the Constitution and the majority of the House. So I think that the people of California want California to fight. They want us to push back against abusive actions like what's happening in Texas, to block it, to neutralize it, to stymie it, and to not allow it to happen. And so, of course, the Independent Redistricting Commission is a good idea. I supported it at the time, and I think every state should have it. But we cannot tie one hand behind our back here in California. The governor has said we got to fight fire with fire. The governor has said we can't be involved in unilateral disarmament. The governor has said, and I agree.
Attorney General Bonta wanted to bring up another point of conflict between the states and this White House, and that is crime. Earlier today, Vice President J.D. Vance was at Washington's Union Station meeting with National Guard troops who were patrolling in the city. And here is the vice president's message amid protesters in the background.
We do not have to allow our cities to be taken over by violence and
disorder and by chaos, you can actually do stuff. You can actually bring law and order to communities. You've just got to have the political willpower to do it. I think that if we set a standard in Washington, D.C., that political willpower can bring some common sense law and order back to these communities, then maybe some other communities and other cities will follow suit.
Attorney General Bonta, how concerned are you that the president may try again to send Guard troops and mobilize them and send the U.S. military to cities in California and perhaps in other cities across the country where he may have a difference? And what is your legal response to that?
It is Trump's articulated desire to treat the patriotic men and women of our military as political pawns, as his personal army, to deploy them in only blue cities and blue states, completely transparently partisan about it, and to do so unlawfully, in violation of the Posse Comitatus Act, which has been in place since the late 1800s, over a century, part of the founding principles of our nation when the British monarchy placed the army in the colonies to be involved in civilian law enforcement. He cannot place the military into American cities on American soil to engage in civilian law enforcement. Is against the law. And he is saying he wants to fight crime. That is the definition of civilian law enforcement. So if he seeks to do it, we will see him in court. We will stop him. We will block him. He will be clearly in violation of the law. And, he is a repeat offender. He is lawless and law breaking. We have sued him 39 times in 30 weeks. We have secured restraining orders and preliminary injunctions over 90% of the time when the court has ruled on our request. So he is taking L's day after day in court because he's breaking the law. And he complains quite a bit about losing in court and court orders that are against him. If he doesn't want court orders against him, he should stop breaking the law. It's that simple. He breaks the law, we sue. He doesn't break the law, we don't sue.
Right, and Mr. Attorney General, just in the last 30 seconds that we have you, I do want to keep on this topic of crime because I know you're part of a litigation effort against the Trump administration blocking access to grants for victims of crime. Have you gotten a response from the administration?
No, we filed on Monday, and this is an anti-public safety, anti-victim administration. They are trying to treat victims as political pawns, victims of domestic violence, of gun violence, of sexual assault, and pull funding away from them through the Victims of Crime Act, which provides $1 billion to over 10 million victims every year, and trying to leverage that funding to force states unlawfully to engage and participate in their mass deportation, cruel immigration agenda. It's against the law. They can't do it. And if Trump really wants to help places that need help with crime, he should look at Louisiana, Alabama, and Arkansas, which have, as of 2022, the top 3 highest homicide rates in the nation.
All right, Rob Bonta, Attorney General of California, thank you so much for joining Bloomberg.
And make sure to tune in to Balance of Power tomorrow for Michael McKee's interview with Austan Goolsbee, president of the Chicago Fed from Jackson Hole. That will be right here at 5:45 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Let's tune in tomorrow night for our interview with former Vice President Mike Pence. That's tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. Thanks so much for joining us on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg. Alongside Michael Shepard, I'm Tyler Kendall. We'll see you back right here tomorrow.